Grandma told everyone Grandpa's $439,000 vanished into medical bills, and I almost believed her. Until I opened one blue folder and saw a clinic charging him from a building that had been closed for years. They called me cruel for asking questions, but the secret account I found proved Grandpa's illness was only the cover. My name is Veda Carroway. I am 34 years old, and I read medical bills for a living. That sounds like a boring thing to say at the start of a family story, but in my family, boring paperwork was the only reason the truth survived. My grandmother told us my grandfather's $439,000 disappeared into medical bills. She said it with wet eyes, with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, like grief itself had written the number down for her. Everyone believed her because medical bills scare people. They sound too big to question and too painful to touch. But medical bills have codes, they have dates, they have provider numbers, payment addresses, claim adjustments, and signatures. They have a shape. And 3 weeks after my grandfather was buried, I opened a blue folder on my kitchen table and saw a bill for cancer treatment from a clinic that had been closed for 2 years. 6 weeks later, a credit union officer would slide one signature card across a conference table, and my grandmother's soft little story would turn into a silence so heavy nobody in the room knew where to look. I did not go looking for a war. I went looking for one honest invoice. Subscribe before the first fake bill gets read out loud, because this is the story of how my grandmother said Grandpa's $439,000 went to medical bills until her secret account surfaced. We lived in Harthwick, Wisconsin, a small town with frozen sidewalks half the year and lake water so cold it looked like steel in November. My grandfather, Nolan Carroway, had been a school bus mechanic for 38 years. He was the kind of man who could hear an engine cough once and tell you which belt was tired. He kept everything in little spiral notebooks: oil changes, tire rotations, grocery prices, the year he replaced the cabin stove, the day a raccoon chewed through the porch screen. He was not rich in the loud way, no boat with a name painted on it, no new truck every 3 years. But he had money because he never wasted it. He had retirement savings, an old factory injury settlement from before I was born, and money from selling a small machine shed lot behind his house. When he got sick, he told me once, sitting in the passenger seat after a hospital visit, "Veda, money is just a promise with numbers on it. Make sure promises get kept." I laughed because he sounded like himself, even with a blanket over his knees. I didn't know then that one day I would need those words like a handrail. My grandmother, Imogene Carroway, was the opposite of him in almost every visible way. Grandpa was grease under the nails and numbers in a notebook. Grandma was soft sweaters, church casseroles, and a voice that made people lean closer. She had a way of making herself seem fragile even when she was steering the whole room. At the funeral, people kept touching her shoulder and telling her how strong she was. She sat in the front pew with a folded tissue in her hand and looked smaller than I had ever seen her. My Uncle Baylor stood behind her chair like a guard. Baylor was Grandpa's oldest son, broad-faced, loud, the kind of man who used the word family when he meant obey me. My Aunt Margine cried so hard, her husband Tavin had to keep passing her napkins. My cousin Keaton, a real estate agent with shiny shoes and a smile that never settled, kept whispering into his phone near the coat rack. I notice that because I notice things when I am sad. My mind gives me details to hold so I don't fall apart. The first strange thing happened 2 days after the funeral, not at a will reading, not in a lawyer's office, but in Grandma's dining room with a pot roast cooling on the counter. Baylor told us the estate would be simple. Grandpa's accounts were nearly empty. The family cabin on Lake Harrow might have to be sold to cover remaining medical obligations. He said that phrase like he had practiced it. Remaining medical obligations. Grandma lowered her eyes and nodded. "Your grandfather's care was expensive," she said. "So expensive I can hardly say it out loud." Markine reached for her hand. Keaton shook his head like the world had personally disappointed him. I sat still because my brain had stopped on one word: obligations. I worked in billing compliance at Bryan County Medical Center. I knew what real obligations looked like. They came with itemized statements, claim numbers, appeal windows, and provider notices. They did not usually appear as a fog around a family cabin 2 days after a burial. I asked quietly, "How much are we talking about?" Baylor looked at me the way men look at women who ask the exact question they hope nobody would ask. "This isn't the time for an audit, Veda." Grandma touched the side of her throat. "It was about $439,000, once everything was counted." The room softened around her. $439,000 is a number big enough to make people stop thinking. It sounds like proof because it is too large to be casual. Markine said, "Cancer ruins families." Keaton added, "Hospitals don't care who they crush." I looked at Grandma. "Did insurance deny the claims?" Her eyes lifted just a little. Baylor answered for her. "There were gaps. There were specialists. There were things Medicare doesn't touch." He waved his hand as if the details were ugly and beneath us. Maybe he expected me to accept that. Most people would have. But my whole job was living inside the details people waved away. I did not accuse anyone that night. I helped clear plates. I hugged Grandma before I left. She held me longer than usual and whispered, "Don't make this harder, honey." It was almost tender. Almost. I drove home under a sky full of low gray clouds and tried to talk myself out of suspicion. Grief can make people messy. Baylor could be repeating numbers he did not understand. Grandma could have stacked bills unopened until they felt like a mountain. But Grandpa had Medicare, a strong supplement, and a local assistance program I had helped him apply for during his first round of treatment. I remembered the approval letter. I remembered the deductible cap. I remembered the hospice social worker telling us almost everything was covered. Numbers began to move in my head the way loose coins roll across a floor. I could not make them stop. The next morning, I asked Grandma for the medical bills. Not bank statements, not estate papers, just bills. I told her I could help organize them and maybe appeal anything unfair. That made it hard for them to say no without sounding guilty. 3 hours later, Baylor dropped off a blue accordion folder at my apartment. He didn't step inside. "Here," he said, "since you need to feel useful." The folder was thick and smelled faintly like Grandma's perfume. On the front, in her careful handwriting, she had written, "Nolan Medical Final." I set it on my table and made coffee I never drank. Then I opened it. At first glance, the folder looked real enough to scare a normal person. Big balances, urgent headings, oncology words, facility fees, specialist charges, but the longer I looked, the less the pages behaved like real bills. One invoice listed oncology infusion services on a date Grandpa had been at home with hospice. Another bill had a provider address in Madison, but the payment remittance box pointed to a P.O. box in northern Illinois. A third used a billing code for outpatient chemotherapy, but the line description said consultation review. That was wrong, not impossible, but wrong enough to mark. Then I found the page that made my fingers go cold. North Shore Regional Cancer Center. Balance due $58,200. The name looked official. The logo looked official. But North Shore Regional had closed its oncology wing 2 years before Grandpa's diagnosis. I knew because our hospital had absorbed part of its patient load, and I had spent 3 months cleaning up those transferred billing files. Dead clinics do not bill new cancer patients. I scanned every page. Then I made a spreadsheet. Date, provider, amount, code, problem, source. I did it slowly because going too fast would have made it feel like revenge, and I wanted it to feel like work. By midnight, I had 12 questionable invoices totaling $311,000 and 7 payment confirmations that did not match any real hospital statement format I had ever seen. One had Grandpa's patient account number with 1 digit missing. One had my initials beside the word reviewed, which made my stomach drop. VC. I stared at those 2 letters for a long time. I had reviewed real forms for Grandpa. Yes, I had helped him appeal a denied wheelchair rental once. I had signed notes, but I had never approved payments. I had never touched his money. Whoever made that page knew enough about my role to make me useful if Blame ever needed a new home. By the next evening, the family group chat had turned into a small courtroom. Baylor wrote, "Grandma is exhausted. Please stop asking for papers." Marcine wrote, "Some people process grief by controlling things." Keaton wrote, "Medical bills are complicated, Veda. Working near a hospital doesn't make you a detective." That one almost made me smile. Working near a hospital did not make me a detective. Working in billing compliance made me exactly the wrong person to hand fake bills to. I did not reply. Silence is not weakness when you are gathering facts, it is storage. Still, the pressure worked on me more than I wanted to admit. I loved my grandmother. I had Sunday memories with her. Cinnamon rolls, old hymns, her teaching me to sew a button on a sweater. I had spent nights at her house when my parents worked late. She had called me Little Owl because I watched everything. Part of me wanted the blue folder to be a mistake made by grief, bad filing, fear, confusion, anything softer than fraud. So I did the fairest thing I could do. I took the folder to someone who did not know my family. Nessa Thorne had an office in a plain brick building beside a pharmacy in Briar Falls. She was an independent medical billing auditor, the kind of person hospitals dislike and patients should know exists. She had silver hair cut sharp at her chin and a voice that did not waste warmth where clarity would do. I gave her the folder and told her I wanted a professional review, not comfort. She spent the first 20 minutes flipping pages without changing expression. Then she took off her glasses and said, "These are not messy bills." I waited. She tapped the North Shore invoice. "This is manufactured." She tapped another. "This provider number belongs to a dental practice in Green Bay." Another. "This format was copied from a real hospital statement, but the payment address is wrong." Then she pointed at the page with my initials. "And this looks scanned in from somewhere else? See the blur around the letters? Different resolution, different pressure pattern." I felt a strange relief, sharp and sick. The bills were fake. That meant I was not crazy. It also meant someone in my family had built a lie large enough to hide $439,000. Nessa told me what we needed next: real explanation of benefits from insurance, hospice statements, pharmacy records, any bank notice, any tax form. "Bills can lie," she said, sliding the folder back to me. "Insurance trails are harder to fake. Tax documents are harder still." I thought about that sentence 2 days later when I stopped by Grandma's house to bring soup and saw an envelope sitting on the hall table. It was addressed to Nolan Carroway with a return address from Tamarack Ridge Credit Union. Across the top, in small black print, it said, "Tax form enclosed." Grandma saw me looking at it and moved faster than I had seen her move since the funeral. She picked it up and tucked it under a magazine. "Junk," she said. Too quickly, too lightly. A tax form is many things. It is rarely junk. I did not steal the envelope. I want that clear. I went home and called the estate attorney, a careful woman named Petra Vale, who had handled Grandpa's simple documents years ago. I told her there might be an undisclosed financial account connected to estate assets. Petra did not react like television lawyers react. She sighed, asked for dates, and told me to send everything I had in a clean timeline. The next week, through proper estate channels, she requested account information from Tamarack Ridge Credit Union. Baylor found out and called me before dinner. "You are harassing an old widow," he said. "No," I said. "I am asking why Grandpa got a tax form from an account nobody listed." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for me to hear the first crack. Then he said, "You better be careful where you point that finger." I wrote that down too. The account had a name. The North Fen Reserve account. It had been opened 8 months before Grandpa died. Not under the Carroway Family Trust, not under the estate, not under his regular bank profile, but using Grandma's maiden name as a secondary identifier. Imogene Fenlow Carroway. That alone was not illegal. Married people can have separate accounts. Old people can move money. but the signature card changed the air in Petra's office. Grandpa's name appeared as joint owner on the opening paperwork, shaky and thin. The date was 3 days after his neurologist noted moderate cognitive decline and limited capacity for complex financial decisions. I knew that line because I had helped Grandma take him to that appointment. He had asked me twice on the ride home whether we were going to church or the doctor. He had not known it was Tuesday. And according to the credit union, 3 days later, he had helped open a new reserve account that would receive hundreds of thousands of dollars. The first transfer was $122,000 from his retirement savings, then $74,000 from the machine shed lot proceeds, then smaller wires, odd amounts, round amounts, reimbursements marked medical settlement, care review, facility hold, and private support. None of it went to a hospital. None of it went to a cancer center. The largest outgoing payment from North Van Reserve was $51,000 to Sonoran Palms residents in Mesa, Arizona, a luxury assisted living community with fountains in the courtyard and a brochure full of smiling white-haired people drinking lemonade under desert flowers. Grandma had put down a private apartment deposit while telling us she was broke. Another $86,000 had gone to Baylor in 4 payments labeled caregiving management, though I was the one who had spent lunch breaks arguing with insurance and driving Grandpa to lab work when Baylor was too slammed to help. Another $38,000 had gone to an escrow company connected to Keaton's real estate office. Petra found that one first and went very quiet. Keaton had arranged an option agreement on the lake cabin. Not a sale yet. A private option. It gave an outside buyer the right to purchase the property at a price far below market once medical obligations required liquidation. Those exact words appeared in the document. Medical obligations. The phrase from Grandma's dining room. The buyer was not some desperate local family. It was a short-term rental company from Milwaukee using a holding LLC. Keaton stood to receive commission. Baylor had signed as family representative. Grandma had initialed every page. Grandpa's beloved Lake Harrow cabin, the place he had repaired board by board and wanted kept for family, was being lined up like an old chair at a yard sale. That night I played the voicemail again. Grandpa had left it for me 4 months before he died, after a confused family conversation about bills. His voice was rough, but it was his. Veda, if anything happens, don't let them sell the lake place for bills I don't owe. I don't know what's what anymore, but I know that place is paid for. You hear me, little owl? Paid for. I listened to it in the dark 3 times. It was not legal proof by itself. I knew that. But it was the sound of a man trying to protect one clear truth while the rest of his mind was filling with fog. I stopped feeling uncertain after that. I still felt sad. I still felt sick. But I was not uncertain. When families feel truth coming, they do not always run. Sometimes they decorate the lie and invite you to sit inside it. Grandma asked me to visit her alone. I went because some part of me still wanted to be wrong about her heart, if not the facts. She was in the sunroom with a blanket around her shoulders, watching snow slide from the pine branches outside. For a while, she talked about Grandpa like a wife, his stubbornness, his quiet laugh, the way he measured coffee grounds with the same spoon for 50 years. Then her voice changed. You all think Nolan was a saint because he saved money, she said. You don't know what it is to live 55 years asking if you can replace curtains. I sat across from her and said nothing. She looked at me with dry eyes now. He counted every dollar like I was a child. He loved that cabin more than any comfort I ever asked for. I stayed, I cooked, I smiled. I buried my wants until they stopped making noise. Was none of that worth anything? And God help me, I understood part of it. Resentment can live inside a marriage for decades and still look like devotion from the outside. She had pain. Real pain. Then she said, he would have wasted that money keeping a cabin nobody visits. That was the moment my sympathy reached the end of its road. Grandpa visited it, I said. Every week he could still walk. Her mouth tightened. Your grandfather was not the only person who mattered. No, I said, but he was the person whose illness you used as a receipt. She slapped me. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to end something. I stood up slowly. She looked shocked, as if her own hand had betrayed her. "You're twisting this," she whispered. "Baylor said you would." I touched my cheek and finally saw the shape of the family machine. Grandma had the wound, Baylor had the plan, Keaton had the buyer, the fake bills gave all of them cover. And I was useful twice. First as the person who knew enough about medical paperwork to make the lie sound believable if I stayed quiet, then as the person to blame if I did not. The accusation came 2 days later. Baylor sent a message to the family thread with a picture of the fake invoice that had my initials on it. "For everyone asking why Veda is suddenly panicking," he wrote, "maybe she should explain why her approval mark is on one of Nolan's payment reviews." Markine called me crying. "Tell me it isn't true." Keaton posted, "This is why people who insert themselves into finances shouldn't throw stones." My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone on the kitchen floor. For 1 full hour, fear took the shape of a room and locked me inside it. Then I remembered who taught me to keep copies. Grandpa did. I opened my old files and found the insurance appeal from 2 years earlier, the wheelchair rental issue. My initials, VC, sat in the corner where I had marked the form reviewed before mailing it. Same tilt, same ink skip in the V. Whoever built the fake invoice had scanned my initials from a real document and pasted them beside a fake approval. Nessa confirmed it the next morning. She wrote a short report with image overlays, resolution differences, and source comparison. "The initials were copied," she said. "Not written." Petra added it to the legal file. That was the day I stopped answering family calls. I did not need to defend myself to people who preferred a clean lie over a hard truth. If they wanted my voice, they could hear it in the mediation room. The meeting was held in the county courthouse annex, not Grandma's house, not some warm family space where tears could rearrange facts. A long table, beige walls, a clock that clicked too loudly. Judge Mercer Ives was not officially trying a case that day, but he supervised probate mediation with the tired patience of a man who had heard every family call greed by a prettier name. Petra sat beside me. Nessa sat on my other side with the blue folder, her audit sheet, and a tablet full of scanned invoice comparisons. Across the table sat Grandma in a navy coat, Baylor with his jaw locked, Keaton looking polished and pale, Markine twisting a tissue until it tore, and Taven staring at his wife like he had started to suspect there were rooms in their marriage he had never entered. Orrin Sable from Tamarack Ridge Credit Union came in last, carrying a thin file and the nervous face of a man who wished paper could burn itself. Baylor opened with a speech because men like him always believe volume can become evidence if it lasts on long enough. He said Grandma had suffered. He said medical debt was cruel. He said I had created suspicion during grief. He said the cabin sale was a painful but practical step. Judge Ives let him talk for almost 2 minutes, then said, "Mr. Carroway, this room will run on documents, not adjectives." I watched Baylor's face darken. It was the first calm moment I had enjoyed in weeks. Petra started with the estate inventory. Nolan Carroway's known assets should have included proceeds and savings, totaling approximately $439,000. Those funds had been described to family members as spent on medical bills. Then Nessa opened the blue folder. She did not dramatize. She read like a professional. Invoice 1, provider closed before service date. Invoice 2, provider number assigned to dental practice. Invoice 3, payment address unrelated to listed facility. Invoice 4, treatment code incompatible with described service. Invoice 5, initials copied from a separate insurance appeal form, not original authorization. Baylor interrupted. "This is ridiculous. People make clerical errors." Nessa looked at him over her glasses. "1 error is clerical. 12 errors pointing money away from real providers is construction." The room went quiet. Grandma lifted her chin. "It was for medical bills," she said. Her voice was soft again, practiced again. "I was the one opening those envelopes at midnight. I was the one watching my husband die. None of you know what that cost." For a second, the old spell tried to enter the room. Marcine began crying. Keaton looked relieved, as if grief might still save them. I opened the credit union file and slid the first page forward. Then why did the medical bills pay interest? I asked. Nobody moved. I pointed to the tax form from North Fen Reserve. Hospitals don't send 1099 interest statements. Secret accounts do. Orrin Sable cleared his throat. He explained that the North Fen Reserve account had been opened with Imogene Fenlow Carroway as primary contact and Nolan Carroway as joint owner. He confirmed the deposits. He confirmed the interest. He confirmed payments from that account to Sonoran Palms residents, to Baylor Carroway, and to escrow tied to Keaton Brill's real estate office. Petra placed the signature card on the table. Grandpa's shaky signature sat at the bottom like a trapped insect. Then she placed the neurologist's note beside it. Limited capacity for complex financial decisions. Date: 3 days before the account opened. Judge Ives leaned forward, read both pages, and removed his glasses. He looked at Grandma first, then Baylor, then Keaton. This estate inventory is not closing today. That was when the room stopped being organized. Marcine turned to Baylor. You told me Veda was making it up. Taven looked at Marcine. You knew about the cabin option? She shook her head, but not fast enough. Keaton said, it was only an option. It wasn't final. Petra answered, it was an attempt to encumber estate property under a false medical debt narrative. I did not even know a sentence that dry could hit so hard. Keaton's mouth shut. Baylor pointed at Grandma. She said Nolan wanted the account. Grandma's face changed, not into guilt, but into betrayal. She had spent weeks letting Baylor act as her shield. Now the shield was stepping away from her. The Sonoran Palms receipt finished what the fake bills had started. Nessa placed the glossy brochure on the table beside the $51,000 deposit record. Desert flowers, private dining, wellness courtyard. Grandma stared at it like it had appeared there by magic. Marcane whispered, You were leaving? Grandma said nothing. Taven stood up slowly. Imogene, we were bringing you groceries. His voice was not angry. That made it worse. Marcine was crying herself sick, thinking you were going to lose the house over hospital debt. Grandma's hands curled in her lap. I deserved somewhere peaceful. I believed she meant it. I also believed Grandpa had deserved not to have his illness turned into a mask. Judge Ives ordered the estate accounting reopened and the cabin sale blocked pending review. The North Fen Reserve funds were frozen. Baylor's caregiving management payments were flagged for return. The fake invoices were referred to the proper investigators. Nobody was dragged out in handcuffs. Real life rarely gives you that kind of clean scene. Instead, it gives you people sitting in a beige room while the future they built on false paper quietly loses its walls. Grandma finally looked at me. Not at Petra, not at Nessa. Me. You always were the little owl, she said. It sounded almost loving, and that was the cruelest part. Always watching. I thought of Grandpa's voicemail. Paid for. You hear me, little owl? Paid for. I met her eyes and said, He asked me to watch because he knew he was losing the ability to. My voice did not shake. That felt like its own inheritance. The aftermath took months because justice is usually paperwork wearing heavy shoes. The secret account did not simply become ours overnight. Lawyers reviewed transfers, the credit union corrected its reporting. Sonoran Palms returned part of the deposit after Petra threatened a formal complaint. Baylor signed a repayment agreement for the management fees he could not justify. Keaton's option agreement collapsed, and his real estate license complaint became the kind of local rumor he could not charm his way out of. The cabin went into a family trust with strict rules. No sale without independent appraisal, full beneficiary notice, and court approval while Grandma was living. That last part was Petra's idea. She said families who commit one quiet fraud often try a second one after everyone gets tired. I decided not to get tired. Grandma did not go to Arizona. She moved into a smaller assisted living apartment 30 minutes from Hearthwick. Not terrible, not luxurious, just real. Marcine still visits her. Baylor does sometimes, though their conversations are shorter now. Keaton left town for a while and returned with less shine on him. Tavin stayed with Markeen, but something in their marriage changed after that room. Not broken, maybe, but permanently awake. As for me, I stopped being useful in the way my family preferred. When someone called about an insurance form, I sent them the hospital's patient advocate number. When Markine asked if I could just glance at her tax documents, I sent her a CPA's website. When Baylor texted me once, "We all made mistakes," I answered, "Some mistakes have routing numbers." He never replied. I still visit the cabin, not often, enough. The first time I went back, after everything, the lake was half frozen and the porch boards complained under my boots. Grandpa's old notebook was still in the drawer by the stove. Cabin roof patched, September 14th. Porch rail tightened, October 2nd. Paid in full, written beside the stove repair in his blocky handwriting. I sat at the table where he used to clean fish and played his voicemail one more time. I did not cry until he said, "Little owl." Then I cried hard, the ugly kind that leaves your ribs tired. Not because I had won. Winning is too bright a word for a story like this. I cried because the money had been found, the cabin had been saved, the fake bills had been exposed, and none of it brought him back to the chair across from me. Here's what I learned. Medical bills can scare a family into silence, but silence is exactly where dishonest people hide. Grief can be real and still be used as a weapon. A person can be hurt and still do harm. My grandmother's loneliness was real. Her resentment was real. But Grandpa's money did not disappear into medicine. It disappeared into a story she thought no one would know how to read. She forgot one thing. I read those stories for a living. So if someone ever tells you a number is too painful to question, ask for the paper. If someone says you are cruel for wanting an itemized bill, ask why the total needs your silence. And if a family calls you difficult because you can still add while everyone else is crying, let them. Sometimes difficult is just what honest looks like before the truth has witnesses. Share this with someone who needs to ask for the itemized bill. Drop a comment, subscribe, and remember this. A lie can wear a soft voice, but the paper underneath still knows exactly what happened. Commentary, lesson, and explanation. Now let's open the story, not just the file. Now that we have heard Veda Carroway's full story, let's slow down and look at what really happened here. This was not just a story about missing money. It was not only about a grandmother, a secret account, or fake medical bills. Under the surface, this was a story about how people use grief to hide truth, how families use emotions to stop honest questions, and how one calm person can change everything by refusing to ignore the paper trail. The most interesting part of this story is that Veda did not begin as a fighter. She did not walk into the family with revenge in her heart. She started with one simple question. If Grandpa's medical bills used up $439,000, where are the real bills? That is such a normal question, but in some families the normal question is treated like an attack. The person who asks for proof becomes cold. The person who wants details becomes disrespectful. The person who sees a number that does not make sense becomes the problem. That is where the story becomes bigger than money. It shows us how truth can become dangerous inside a family that is surviving on a lie. The first warning sign was not the money. A lot of people may think the first warning sign was the $439,000, but listen closely. The first warning sign was not the number. The first warning sign was the speed. Grandpa had just died, and already the family was being pushed toward a fast explanation. The money is gone, the bills were huge, the cabin may need to be sold, and everyone should accept it. That is a pattern. When someone wants a lie to survive, they often move quickly. They do not want people to sit with the facts. They do not want time for questions. They want pressure, grief, guilt, and urgency to do the work. That is why Baylor kept using strong phrases like remaining medical obligations. It sounds official. It sounds serious. It makes normal people feel like they are not smart enough to challenge it. But Veda understood something important. Real medical debt has records. Real providers send itemized statements. Real insurance claims leave a trail. When a person uses big, scary words but avoids simple documents, that is not strength. That is smoke. Why medical bills worked as the perfect cover. In this story, Grandma Imogene did not choose a random excuse. She chose medical bills because medical bills scare people. Most families do not understand hospital billing. They hear words like Medicare, supplement, specialist, infusion, facility fee, and hospice, and they shut down. They assume the bill must be real because the system itself feels too complex to question. That is what made the lie so effective. It was not only emotional, it was technical. Grandma and Baylor were counting on the family's fear of paperwork. They were counting on people saying, well, healthcare is expensive, so maybe it's true. But Veda's job gave her a different kind of vision. She could look at a bill and see if the code matched the service. She could look at a provider number and know it had to connect to a real medical office. She could see that a closed cancer clinic could not bill a patient 2 years later. This is a strong lesson. Sometimes lies hide behind things we do not understand. Money, law, medical bills, insurance, taxes, contracts. If the subject feels confusing, dishonest people may use that confusion as a wall, but a wall is not the same as truth. It only means you may need help reading what is behind it. Veda's power was her calm. One of the strongest parts of Veda's character is that she did not fight with noise. She fought with order. She scanned the bills. She made a spreadsheet. She checked dates. She hired Nessa Thorne. She went through the estate attorney. She waited for proper documents. That may sound boring, but that is the exact reason she won. A loud person can be dismissed as emotional. An angry person can be called bitter. A person who yells can be turned into the story. But a person with clean records is harder to erase. Veda understood that. She knew her family wanted to make the discussion about her attitude. They wanted to say she was hurting Grandma. They wanted to say she was greedy. They wanted to say she was making grief harder. So Veda did something very smart. She did not give them a dramatic version of herself to attack. She gave them documents. That is a lesson many people miss. Calm is not weakness. Calm can be control. Calm can be protection. Calm can be the space where facts stay clear. Grandma was hurt, but she still did harm. Now let's talk about Grandma Imogene because she is not a simple villain. That makes the story more powerful. She was not written as someone who woke up one day and decided to be evil. She had pain inside her. She felt financially controlled by Nolan for decades. She felt like she had lived her marriage asking permission to want small comforts. She felt unseen. She felt tired. She wanted a peaceful place for herself before life ran out. That pain matters. But here is the hard truth. Pain does not give a person permission to steal, lie, or use a dying person's illness as a cover. Grandma's resentment may explain why she did it, but it does not excuse what she did. There is a big difference between understanding someone and forgiving the damage without accountability. This is one of the deepest lessons in the story. People can have real wounds and still become harmful. Someone can cry real tears and still lie. Someone can feel abandoned and still betray another person. We must be careful not to confuse sadness with innocence. Grandma was hurt, yes, but Grandpa was sick, his money was moved, his cabin was nearly sold, his illness was used as a mask. Those facts do not disappear because Grandma had a painful marriage. Baylor's role shows how one lie becomes a family system. Baylor is important because he shows how a lie needs helpers. Grandma had the emotional reason. Baylor had the pressure. Keaton had the business angle. Together, they built a system. One person created the soft story. One person enforced it. One person was ready to profit from it. Baylor did not need to make fake medical bills with his own hands to be responsible. He pushed the family to stop asking questions. He used shame. He called Veda disrespectful. He made her look like the problem. He accepted caregiving management money even though he had not done the real caregiving work. That is not a small mistake. That is participation. In many families, there is often one person who acts like the protector, but really protects the secret. They speak the loudest. They tell everyone to calm down. They say, "This is not the time." They say, "Think about the family." But what they really mean is, do not look where the truth is buried. Keaton's cabin deal changed the story. The cabin twist is very important because it moved the story beyond stolen money. It showed that Grandpa's memory was being erased for profit. The lake cabin was not just property. It was a symbol of Nolan's life. He repaired it. He protected it. He kept it paid for. He left a voicemail because even with his mind fading, he knew one thing clearly. The cabin did not need to be sold for bills he did not owe. That voicemail gave the story a heart. Documents proved the fraud, but the voicemail reminded us why it mattered. This was not only about $439,000. This was about a man losing control of his life while others used his weakness. It was about a final wish being buried under fake paperwork. It was about a family trying to turn a loved place into cash while pretending grief forced their hand. When Keaton arranged a low-price option agreement, he showed us how betrayal often dresses itself as practical. Selling the cabin was not practical. It was convenient for the people who had built the lie. The fake initials were a smart but cruel attack. The moment they used Veda's initials on a fake invoice is one of the sharpest turns in the story. Until then, Veda was investigating the lie. After that, the lie tried to swallow her. This is important because when dishonest people feel trapped, they often do not just defend themselves. They try to turn the accusation around. They took the truest thing about Veda, that she had helped Grandpa with medical paperwork, and twisted it into suspicion. That is a very realistic kind of attack. Liars often use a little truth as a handle for a bigger lie. Veda had helped with forms. That part was true, but she had not approved fake payments. She had not moved money. She had not created the bills. Still, Baylor used her initials because he knew the family might believe it. This is why records matter. Veda had kept copies. She found the old appeal form. Nessa proved the initials were copied. That saved Veda from a false story. The lesson is clear. When you help people with money, medical papers, legal forms, or family business, keep records. Not because you expect betrayal, but because memory becomes weak when people want a scapegoat. The mediation room was the right climax. The climax did not happen in a kitchen. It happened in a courthouse annex, in a quiet room with a long table and a clock on the wall. That setting matters. It removed the emotional home field advantage. Grandma could not control the room with memories. Baylor could not control it with volume. Keaton could not smile his way through it. The room belonged to documents. Judge Mercer Ives gave one of the most important lines in the whole commentary layer. The room would run on documents, not adjectives. That line explains the entire story. The family had survived on adjectives: cruel, greedy, grieving, complicated, disrespectful, practical. Veda came with nouns: invoice, provider number, tax form, signature card, deposit record, option agreement. That is why the truth became stronger. The final hit was simple. Then why did the medical bills pay interest? That sentence worked because it cut through every emotional excuse. Hospitals do not pay interest on secret reserve accounts. Medical bills do not create tax forms. Fake stories can sound human, but bank records speak a colder language. The secret account was more than a bank account. The North Fen Reserve account was not just where the money went. It was where the truth had been hiding. It showed intention. It showed planning. It showed that this was not confusion from grief. Money had been moved, renamed, stored, and sent out under labels that made the family believe it was all connected to medical care. That is why the title is powerful. The secret account surfaced, and once it surfaced, everything changed. Before that, Grandma had a story. After that, Veda had structure. The account connected the fake bills, the Arizona deposit, Baylor's payments, and Keaton's cabin deal. A good mystery does not only reveal one fact, it reveals the system behind the fact. That is what happened here. No handcuffs, but real consequences. The ending is realistic. Nobody gets dragged away in front of everyone. There is no dramatic police scene. There is no perfect courtroom speech where every villain cries and confesses. Instead, the estate is reopened, the account is frozen, the cabin sale is blocked. Baylor has to repay money. Keaton's deal collapses. Grandma loses her luxury Arizona plan. The family has to live with the truth. That kind of ending may feel less flashy, but it is stronger. Real justice often moves through forms, notices, repayment agreements, frozen accounts, and legal review. It is slow, it is not glamorous, but it can still change everything. The important thing is that the lie lost its power. The family could no longer pretend. The documents had become witnesses. What Veda really won. Veda did not win a clean family. She did not win an apology that fixed everything. She did not get Grandpa back. What she won was something quieter, the right to stop doubting herself. She won the right to stop being the family's free problem solver. She won the right to say no. She won the right to protect Grandpa's promise without apologizing for being careful. That is a huge emotional victory. Many people are trained to be useful in families. They are asked to handle paperwork, fix bills, calm arguments, remember birthdays, help elders, and clean up messes. But the moment they ask for respect or truth, they become difficult. Veda's final change is powerful because she stops serving a family system that only valued her when she was silent. She still feels pain. She still cries at the cabin. That is important. Strength does not mean you feel nothing. Strength means you keep choosing truth, even when it hurts. Life lesson 1. Always ask for the itemized bill. The first practical lesson is simple. Ask for the itemized bill. In this story, that one action opened the door. Not because every large bill is fake, but because real bills can survive questions. Honest records do not need fear to protect them. This lesson applies beyond hospitals. Ask for the contract. Ask for the receipt. Ask for the bank statement. Ask for the written agreement. Ask for the date. Ask for the copy. A person who is telling the truth may be annoyed, but the truth will still stand. A person who is lying will often attack the question itself. Life lesson 2. Grief should not cancel accountability. Grief deserves compassion, but grief should not become a shield for dishonesty. In the story, Grandma's widowhood made everyone afraid to question her. That is understandable. Nobody wants to hurt an old grieving woman. But the problem is that the lie used that compassion as protection. This is difficult but necessary. You can be gentle with a grieving person and still ask for truth. You can respect someone's pain and still protect an estate. You can love a family member and still say, "This number does not make sense." Boundaries do not become cruelty just because someone is sad. Life lesson. 3 confusing systems are where lies hide. Medical billing was confusing to the family, so the lie hid there. In another story, it could be taxes. In another, it could be a trust. In another, it could be a mortgage, a loan, a business account, or a retirement plan. The pattern is the same when people do not understand a system. They may accept whatever the loudest person says about it. The solution is not to become an expert in everything. The solution is to know when to bring in someone who is. Veda brought in Nessa. That was smart. She did not only trust her own anger or suspicion, she got professional eyes on the documents. That made the truth stronger. Life lesson 4. Keep copies when you help people. Veda was protected because she kept records. Her old file proved her initials had been copied. Without that, the family might have successfully turned suspicion toward her. This is a real lesson. When you help relatives with financial, medical, or legal paperwork, save copies. Write dates, keep emails, take notes. It may feel cold at the time, but it can protect both you and the person you are helping. Trust is good. Documentation is not the enemy of trust. Documentation is what protects trust when memory fails or someone chooses to lie. Life lesson 5. A soft voice can still carry a lie. Grandma did not act like a classic villain. She was soft. She was elderly. She cried. She talked about sacrifice. She had pain. That made her believable. But this story teaches us that harm does not always come with a cruel face. Sometimes it comes with trembling hands and a sad story. Sometimes it comes from someone who has suffered and thinks that suffering gives them the right to take. We need compassion, but we also need clarity. A soft voice can tell the truth. A soft voice can also lie. The difference is not the tone. The difference is the evidence. Life lesson: and do not become the family scapegoat for being accurate. Veda was called difficult because she was accurate. That happens a lot. In unhealthy family systems, the person who names the problem is treated as worse than the problem itself. The lie can sit quietly for months, but the person who exposes it becomes the one who ruined everything. This is backwards. The truth did not create the damage. The fraud created the damage. The fake bills created the damage. The secret account created the damage. Veda only turned on the lights. If something falls apart when the lights turn on, it was already broken in the dark. Final discussion. What this story is really saying. At the end, Veda sits in the cabin and listens to Grandpa's voicemail. That moment brings the story back to love. Not loud love, not perfect love, real love. Grandpa could not fight for himself anymore, but he left one clear truth behind. The cabin was paid for, and the bills were not what people said they were. Veda honored that truth. The story is not telling us to suspect everyone. It is not saying every family has a secret account or every medical bill is fake. It is saying something more careful and more useful. When a number does not make sense, do not let guilt make you blind. When people rush you past the details, slow down. When someone says asking questions is cruel, ask why silence is so important to them. Veda's victory was not revenge in the loud way. It was restoration. The cabin stayed protected. The false story collapsed. The secret account was found. The people who used grief as cover had to face documents they could not shame, charm, or cry away. And maybe that is the strongest message of the whole story. Truth does not need to scream. Sometimes it just needs one person patient enough to read the fine print, save the copies, and ask the question everyone else is afraid to ask. The end.